it just irks me because it's just this blatant hypocrisy. And I don't like to jump on hypocrisy because we're all hypocrites,
Right.
but it's such a powerful argument against Christianity that people are just not giving a shit about masks, that are just in the streets, just living their daily lives. And I think the moment that I got really upset was there's a local pastor of a large church, and he said something about, we just need to open things up. We're all going to get it anyway. And that mentality, I think, is so anti-Christian that for me, it's borderline. It's heretical for one, but for two, it's just disgusting. And I don't understand it. I'm trying to be sympathetic, but for me, I think pro-life has to be universal because Christianity is a universal religion. It's a call for the redemption of everything. I have this pet theory about climate change actually being good for California, in the vein of that movie that wasn't so accurate. What was it called? The Day After Tomorrow, where there's going to be this kind of reverse cooling pattern that's going to happen from climate change. And I'm kind of thinking that California is going to become Florida, and we're going to suddenly get all this water. Anyway, we're going down a rabbit trail already that we don't need to go down.
Well, and part of it is that 24-hour news cycle where we need a breaking news thing on 24 hours a day on cable news. So everything has to be an emergency, a crisis, a thing. And it's actually the interesting thing about Donald Trump calling Joe Biden Sleepy Joe. And now that Joe Biden is president, I think we're all, man, it's nice not to have an absolute freaking chaos emergency every 3 hours of every day.
Yeah, I think you're experiencing what we're all experiencing, which is after being released from a kidnapping, like you don't know what to do with your time exactly. And so you have the freedom of security. It's hard. I almost go on Twitter just once a day just to see if he's there,
Just to make sure.
Just like the kid opening up the closet door that is not sure if the monster's there, but just wants to check.
Well, you and I both do podcasts on a number of topics, but we're here talking today because you shot me an email the other day and said, what about this pro-life thing? I'm not sure. I don't know. What was your feeling on that? You were a little bit struggling with the idea of even the title of pro-life, perhaps?
I think I'm having a little bit of difficulty understanding, because I'm sympathetic to evangelical Christians, having grown up in that world. And if you believe a lot of the things that evangelical Christians believe, their behavior makes sense. If you take their premises to be true, behavior makes sense. Like any group, sometimes your beliefs have these kind of inherent contradictions. And I'm seeing that really present with the pandemic and how people are treating 400,000 people dying, while at the same time holding to these titles of pro-life or Christian or something. And it just irks me because it's just this blatant hypocrisy. And I don't like to jump on hypocrisy because we're all hypocrites,
Right.
But it's such a powerful argument against Christianity that people are just not giving a shit about masks, that are just in the streets, just living their daily lives. And I think the moment that I got really upset was there's a local pastor of a large church that said something. I think the church's name has something to do with collecting water at some hole that's in the ground somewhere. And then he said something about, we just need to open things up. We're all going to get it anyway. And that mentality, I think, is so anti-Christian that for me, it's borderline. It's heretical for one, but for two, it's just disgusting. And I don't understand it. I'm trying to be sympathetic, but for me, I think pro-life has to be universal because Christianity is a universal religion. It's a call for the redemption of everything.
No,
And
it's a very exclusive religion.
yes, yeah, very exclusive. So we could talk about pro-life and where it comes from. The history of abortion in the United States is really interesting because it hasn't always been. It's in the last 40 years, so the late 70s, early 80s, that kind of evangelical pro-life emerged as a movement. It was a Catholic thing before that, before we could talk about evangelicals and Catholics and all that.
Yeah.
But,
I think the Southern Baptist Conference even wrote that into a yearly statement that Roe versus Wade, abortion was a Catholic issue, not for Protestants. Am I correct before?
I think so. I think so. It's an interesting thing. So before 1840, basically abortion was pretty widespread and there wasn't really legal issues with it. Everyone was a Christian back then. So Christians regularly got abortions. It was something that they commonly did. And they used like homeopathic medicine as opposed to the surgical procedures we have. And they would go to some like basically witch doctor to get some brew to kill the fetus. And the kind of demarcation for when they could do it or not was quickening, was the idea. So like the feeling of movement indicated life, as if that's what indicates life. There's stuff in my fridge that's moving around that shouldn't be, and I don't think that's an indication of life. But yeah, it was. And then anti-abortion laws, interestingly, emerged as a, what do they call it, a credentialing crisis, because there were physicians that wanted to be able to dictate when someone got an abortion. And they looked at these kind of homeopathic doctors as charlatans, and they wanted to force them out of the industry to control abortions. And that happened in the late 19th century. But then at that point, the physicians worked to pass these laws around 1900 that restricted abortions to only physician-approved procedures. And so it was really a credentialing crisis. And then we have what happened with Roe v. Wade. We have the 1960s. So there's a very complicated history. But I think for a lot of Christians, they see things that are happening today as have always been true. The beliefs that we have now were always there. And it's just not true. They weren't always there. And I think part of it is a lack of literacy, right? We don't read about our past, understand where we come from. And we could talk about, I bitched and moaned about non-denominational stuff last time we talked. We don't have to talk about that again, but I think that's part of the problem as well. But yeah, it's such an interesting phenomenon. And it really has nothing to do with pro-life in my mind. Pro-life is so much bigger than this one single issue. To narrow it down to one single issue seems, again, I don't want to use the word heresy because I don't want to sound like some kind of Spanish inquisitor.
It's the second time you've said it now. So,
well, and I'm obviously influenced by Ross Douthat's great book. What's it called? Something Heretical Nation or Nation of Heretics or something. But I'm using heretic just in the sense of people are making it up as they go. They're just making it up as they go. And that's fine. But what you're doing is not Christian necessarily. It's something else. And that's my issue.
I think it's important, and I heard you say this, that we can understand the passion people have around the issue of abortion. And if you truly believe life begins at conception, it is a passionate issue for you. But there are many things that we have passionate issues around that haven't become the issue that swamps all of Christianity. And so my argument always for people is, if we have an issue that literally makes us say either you're on the right political side of this issue or you're going to hell, we better damn sure make that issue is enunciated loudly and strongly and often in the Bible, if our beliefs actually are based on the Bible. And I just don't think abortion's in there. In fact, the only places where abortion is even closely dealt with in the Bible seem to say, in Numbers, God gives a concoction to make it happen for a woman that's accused of her husband of being adulterous. And in another place in Exodus, it seems to say that if a man strikes a pregnant woman and she miscarries, he has to pay a fine. But if she dies, he has to pay with his life. And so it would seem to indicate the Bible values the mother's life more than the preborn child, if you will, whatever term we want to use on that. And even, I think you could say the Bible is pretty clear that Adam, as a created human being, was fully formed but not alive, didn't have a soul until the breath came into him, which, as my understanding, is the Jewish tradition. I'm asking where we get the idea, not just that abortion is bad. I can understand where you can cobble some verses together and come up with that idea and feel passionate about it, but that it's this primary issue that usurps everything, even the gospel, even to where that issue is chasing the next two generations away from the faith and away from the church, and we think that's okay. So I guess that's where my place is on it. Is we can argue whether you should be pro-life or pro-choice, and those arguments are happening all the time, but I'm asking, where did it become this primary issue when, as you said, it truly wasn't a primary issue until the election of 1979, as far as I can tell from history?
Yeah, it's interesting. It feels like there's a few problems here that need to be addressed. Number one is obviously the consistency of the term pro-life, right? And that's what I'm trying to tap into a little bit. The second issue, though, is the use of the Bible, right? Is the Bible meant to be a prescriptive rule book that's used to help us navigate the 20th century? I don't know if I want a random assortment of Jews from the BCE to tell me how to navigate the 20th century. Certainly there's a repository of wisdom there that needs to be dug up and understood and help to live our lives. There's a reason we still read Plato, and there's a reason we look to the ancients for wisdom. But there's also some things that the ancients didn't know about, like science and stuff. At least our modern understanding of science. And then the other issue is that the Bible is pretty loose with, at least the God of the Bible is pretty okay with killing people. And you might make this, again, to go back to heresy, you might make this heretical statement like, the Old Testament God killed people, and then Jesus came around and things got better. And then I would be like, what happened to Ananias and Sapphira? Killing them was perfectly okay at that moment. And so the Bible's not consistent on it. The Bible is not consistently pro-life for everybody all the time. Yeah. And the problem, I think, is not that the Bible is inconsistent, is that we're using it in the wrong way as a rule book, as opposed to as a description of what happened, or a kind of theological treatise on helping us understand who God is. So it's the rule book problem that I think is the biggest problem. And I think the universalism, we can talk about that in a second, that's a whole different thing. But I think until we get Christians from this idea that the Bible is a rule book, like, we're just going to go in circles about this crap over and over again. And there's so many people to blame. We should just create a list. We really should.
And what I hear, the silly thing I hear quite a bit is take the Bible literally. And I'm like, okay, have you looked at a woman lustfully lately and plucked out your eyeball? Nobody takes the Bible literally. Let's be honest. Yeah. There's no way you can take every verse literally. I've been a pastor for many years, and I think the Bible is a particularly significant, masterful book in a lot of ways, with a lot of mystery that makes it worthy of something beyond just another book. I think, but we have to be honest about what it is. We have to be honest that there was a group of guys that got together and said, okay, this goes in and this doesn't. And they argued about it, and we're not sure they got it all right. And also that it was written from a Middle Eastern first century perspective, which means it's not easily transferable to 20th century, 21st century America. You're absolutely right. And I believe some of that God says, bash the baby's heads against the stones, were human beings saying, ooh, we did this, we need to justify it. Let's blame God. God told us to do that when we did that. And I think God would be like, nah, don't blame that on me. And then also the that we were taught, of course. Oop, did I break up there?
Just for a second.
Okay, the theological construct is that with covenants, God was working in covenant with humanity. And in the old covenant that he was working under, this is what that agreement looked like. Jesus fulfilled that covenant, and now we're living in a new contract with God, if you will, so to speak. So all of that plays into it. But all of us, and again, this is where we need to be honest, pick and choose. I'm going to believe that verse, and I'm not going to apply that one to my life. And particularly when we start talking about abortion or the other biggie, homosexuality, we are without question saying, okay, those 3 verses in the New Testament, those mean everything to us. And if you come under those 3 verses, you can come to our church, maybe, but there's a line which you will never be able to cross. While other verses like divorce, we just say, yeah, come on, what the heck? You're good tithers, so let's have you.
Yeah.
I just think we need to be honest about what the Bible is, and then we can use it where it's constructive and helpful and a great story of the universe interacting with humanity and get inspiration with that and not kill each other with it.
I think it's just so liberating when you can let go of the kind of literal thing and then the rule book thing, and you can just reading it for the first time once you've let those things go is such a liberating experience, because you're not trolling it for stuff. You're not searching for things to exclude people. It's just, you're just looking to understand what it means. And I'm not saying
that old idea of I can find a Bible verse to say anything I want to say. If I want to zing you with a Bible verse, it's in there. I can find it.
Yeah. And I was saying before we started recording, it's a little bit like someone trolling Oliver Twist, Charles Dickens' novel, to find one sentence where a rich person is doing something right and say, well, Charles Dickens is all about rich people, as opposed to exploring the contradictions of industrial life in England to show the experience of the poor. You can find something anywhere. And so that's why, I don't know.
So you made an interesting point about pro-life and the definition of the term pro-life. Where do you see the dichotomy when talking about abortion and other issues?
So the dichotomy, what do you mean by dichotomy? I just want to understand the question.
I guess I was assuming you saw a dichotomy. Some would say, how can you be anti-abortion and pro-death penalty? How can you be anti-abortion and pro-war, pro-military?
So I've listed out these different areas where I see kind of dichotomies or contradictions or whatever you want to call them. We shouldn't use the word hypocrisy anymore. It's been so overused by Christians that it's done. We need to retire it. And it's lost its original Greek meaning, actors. So obviously the biggest one these days is the pandemic, right? And this kind of battle Christians are caught between, specifically right-wing Christians that kind of have this angry, like, conservative minority mentality that they don't want to be told what to do by the government. But what that's created is this monster of, it's more important that I not wear a mask than someone potentially dying of a disease. And if you're a Christian and you take these kind of, this pro-life mentality seriously, you would do anything to save a life. I remember one of the most profound little anecdotes that is told about what you would do to save a life is told by this philosopher, Peter Singer, who's a non-Christian philosopher, but wrote some really good philosophy. And he tells a story about, imagine you're walking down a road and you're wearing a brand new suit. You just spent $1,000 in this suit. It's for, a job interview you have the next day or something, or your first day of work. And you're walking past a pond and there's a child drowning. Would you slowly take off your $1,000 suit before jumping in the water to save the child's life? No, you wouldn't. You would just jump in, you'd ruin your suit, but you save a life. And I guess that what I'm asking is, does the discomfort of wearing a mask, obviously there's the whole worldview out there about masks don't work, but I don't want to go into that because that's its whole thing. But the question is, how far will you go to save a life? And that really, for me, dictates how, quote unquote, pro-life you are. So there's the age element, which is the more older people are dying of COVID than any other demographic group. And so do we value the infirm? Like, one of the things I hear, and I hear this from Christians a lot, when we talk about people dying of COVID, they ask, what'd they really die of? I've had that asked to me so many times, and it's hard not to have my head explode. But I've tried to remain calm, because the implication there is if you're overweight and have diabetes and COVID accelerates your death, somehow it's your fault. So then we have we have to exclude ill people from the pro-life worldview. And then we obviously have the geographical element. If you're born in the United States, your life is more valuable than others, which we can talk about immigration in that respect. We can talk about the racial element. We can talk about the history of how African Americans have been treated in the United States and other groups, and how places that they live. I remember when I lived in San Francisco, there's this part of town, now the name of it's escaping me. It's the old shipyards where a lot of African Americans moved from the South during World War II to work on Navy ships for the war in the Pacific. And there was some serious chemical leaks and toxins that were released in this area. And there's a famous rock where if you bring like a Geiger counter or whatever next to the rock, you can see the poisons or the radioactivity or whatever it was. And down the street from this rock, there's an elementary school. And it just exposes it all for you about who lives there and how much do we care about it. So there's that element of pro-life. And so and then we could talk about animal lives, and we could talk about future lives with climate change. So to be truly pro-life is very hard. It's very hard.
Right.
And to be consistent about it is near about impossible. So we can do the best we can, but if we just limit it to the unborn, we're not pro-life, we're just pro-birth. That's all we are. We're pro-birth, which is fine.
It has always seemed to me like it's from conception to cutting of the umbilical cord, you really matter to us.
Yeah.
And then once that umbilical cord is cut, you are on your own. And I just think one of the things that Christians miss about the Bible is there is a constant theme of God looking at people in people groups. So I'm talking about people who follow the Bible literally. Jesus said, "Oh, Jerusalem, you who killed the prophets." Not every person in Jerusalem had ever killed a prophet, but he was saying the mindset or the spirit, if you will, the group think was, if a prophet comes and tells us what we don't want to hear, we want to get rid of that guy. And whether we literally murder him or just have murder in our hearts toward him, it is a corporate judgment. And this individualism of Christianity, where you make an individual decision between you and God, whether you're going to be in heaven one day or hell one day, and that's the key to Christianity, I think is missing the ongoing story that God is saying, if you live this life modeled by Jesus, you're going to care about people more. And actually, the judgment of how much you love me is how much you love your neighbor. And then Jesus did this funny story called the Good Samaritan, where he said, "Oh, by the way, your neighbor is that person you hate and you don't think deserve God's love. That's your neighbor. And that's going to determine how much you love God by how much you love that person." So there's actually this compulsion to this corporate heart and love for people that American evangelicalism particularly is in direct opposition to. And so you said the word heretical, and I say that rugged American Christian individualism is heretical to what the Bible actually says on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, it's hard to disentangle people's ideologies and understand what they are. There's so many influences there, and there's married into a Mennonite family, and Mennonites have their tradition is about thinking we need to go back to the beginning as to find some pure form of the religion, but it just doesn't exist in my mind, at least. And I think for me, it's just doing the best you can, but also being honest about where you're limited and being honest about the contradictions. And I think another thing too is trying to, I'm always telling people to read more, but your understanding of Christianity is based on a local past. That's an important part of the religion, but it's also part of the problem here as well. But I think you're right. I think about this individualism, and the other issue that I brought up that I wanted to talk about was this other thing that I've seen since the protests last May is the reemergence of these thin blue line flags, which I think have the same problem that pro-life does, which is they're taking something that's universal, which is the flag, which represents everybody, and they're making it about someone specific for an agenda. And that seems like the worst thing you could do, the absolute worst thing you could do. is make it about someone specific. And I know that I've talked to plenty of people there's plenty of people in my neighborhood that have those flags, and I've talked to a few of them about it and just shared the stars and stripes are about everybody, and changing. It'd be like me going back and taking the Bible out and adding some passages about myself or school teachers. I'm going to add a chapter about school teachers to Hebrews or something. It misses the whole point. It misses the whole point. And I think that's the crux of all the things we're talking about, is that Christianity and the Constitution, the United States, all these concepts are what makes them great is that they include everybody. And we could talk about heaven and hell if you want to, and the problems with that, and including everybody. And I think to go all the way is scary for a lot of people, because it takes away your I'm in-ness. Yeah. But I think it's just not intellectually honest to take the other path. And if for a lot of people, it's not about that. It's not about believing the right things. It's about, I go to the church where they dig water out of a deep. I go to the certain place and I'm part of it. And it's just for them, it's an identity. It's a tribe. It's their inherent primal nature that comes from evolution, that we just want to be in the right group and part of the right group so the other chimpanzees don't kill us. It's all that. And it breaks my heart because it really limits us in what we can do. Yeah. It limits our compassion. It limits our love. And so for me, that's what makes it so hard to participate in any organized religion, even though I do, is that I see it as a crutch in a lot of ways. And there's something to be said about holding on to your culture and your traditions. But there's another thing, if those traditions stop you from being open to others, then they're bankrupt. Then they need to end or change. I think it is, and I think it is the beautiful opportunity of the season. I think it's the gift that Donald Trump has given us, is we really get to see who we are and decide who we are. Do we want to be that, or do we not want to? I don't think you get to stay in the middle really anymore. Some people are trying to do it with unity or some other BS, but you really get to see, do I want to be this nationalistic, race-baiting, people-hating constitutionalist, which I find really ironic when you take the flag and you put blue lines on it and put pictures of Donald Trump on it and call yourself an American, a true American, which is really ironic. Or is life really about, is the life demonstrated by Jesus one of sacrifice and service to others, and that we're going to function well when we're willing to lay down our lives for one another? And 1 John chapter 3 says, if you hate your brother, you're a murderer. If you don't care about people around you, you're the same as the murderer in your heart. And it has this really interesting passage about, if you have resource and you see somebody in need and you don't give it to them, then you have no love of God in you. You are not a follower of God. And how we lost these concepts in the midst of all this, I have no idea. But I think the beauty of the story of Jesus wasn't to come and build this new exclusive religion, and that exclusiveness of we're in and on our way to heaven and they're out, and then add in this eschatology, end times belief of, and any day now Jesus is going to come and we're going to be out of here and everybody else is doomed and getting a 666 on their forehead, gives us this feeling of exclusivity that I don't have to give a shit about anybody. I can extend an offer for them to come join my church, and if they say no, then I hold no responsibility for them whatsoever. And again, as a Christian evangelical pastor, I would argue that ain't in the Bible. What you're saying is diametrically opposed to the story of Jesus and the New Testament of the Bible. Yeah, it's hard because this is my background. And when I spent most of my childhood in Bakersfield, which is essentially the Bible Belt, and went to Christian schools and did that. I believe that's the buckle of the Bible Belt, by the way. Yeah, or the butt. That smells. No, Bakersfield is a little bit underrated. We don't have to talk about that. I agree. Where was I going? So I moved to San Francisco to go to college, and I met all of these kind of refugees from all over the country that were gay and had were born in Nebraska and just escaped as soon as they had enough for a bus ticket or something. And for them, it's really hard to ever reconcile with people who think differently. And I don't have that necessarily. I didn't have this like deep-seated resentment towards these ideas or beliefs. I have more of a sympathy and almost like a family members being picked on, because I think about some of these people that have been manipulating evangelical Christians. Right. I think about someone like Newt Gingrich, who has famously said his favorite book is Chimpanzee Politics. And how, these theological issues, which are paramount, are being treated as tools and weapons to manipulate uneducated people. It just makes me sick. And so I don't have a resentment towards evangelical Christians that believe in any of these things. I have more of a sickness that these people are being manipulated by people in power to retain their power. And so I see it as a systemic problem. But I do agree with you, and I think a lot of what these people are doing is not Christian, but theocratic. They want to control government and use God as a justification for doing that. And it has nothing to do with the Bible whatsoever. And it has everything to do with power and control and keeping others out of it. And I hope that there's a way forward. I don't want to shit on people because they don't know better. I don't want to shit on people that their pastors read their Bible for them for their whole lives and they have one idea about it. To shit on them is to expose your kind of moral callousness. But at the same time, people are adults. And when you believe dangerous stuff and you take those beliefs and use them to disenfranchise other people, we need to strike this balance between understanding that they've been manipulated, but also challenging these beliefs when we can. That's a tough line to walk. And you're doing it. That's what you're up to these days, which is great.
Trying.
And it's a tricky thing to not piss them off, but also wanting to talk to them and try to make movements forward. I don't know. How do you think your conversations, because I sometimes see your Facebook conversations, those look exciting. But how have your conversations gone as you've tried to disentangle these things?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I again, trying to model life after Christ. If I call myself a Christian, that actually means one who follows Christ or wants to look like Christ, or literally means little Christ. And so I looked at what I was doing and said, okay, so let's compare this to what Jesus did. And he was brutal to the religious leaders and the religious system. He never said one good word about them. There's, in fact, a great passage. Gosh, where is it in the Bible? I think it's in, I should have the Bible memorized, but
yeah.
These guys come to Jesus and he's like ripping the Pharisees. And it says the lawgivers came to Jesus and said, Jesus, when you insult those guys, you're insulting us. And so the next 7 verses are then him ripping into them and let me tell you what I really think about you guys. So he wasn't saying every Pharisee was a horrible person, but he was saying this system is terrible because it's destroying people. And the interesting thing is he didn't say the Roman government is terrible and sit there and rail against the Roman government and we need these zealots to overthrow the Roman government, even though it was an extremely despotic, military conquering government. But he said, this religious system that's tied in with this politics, that's the thing that's got to go. So what I've been doing for 2 years is that same thing. Like, this system is completely off. And at first I was hesitant about that because I'm like, there's a lot of good things about it too. But after 2 years now of talking really with people like you, Jordan, I'm like, no, this system's really bad and it's really crushing people's lives. And the thing is, it's not all unintelligent, uneducated people that are stuck in this thing. I have some really smart, really good-hearted friends that are deep into QAnon, deep into end times conspiracy theories, who today, January 28th, still believe Donald Trump is the president of the United States because God says so. And now I guess it's on March 4th, he's going to reinstate himself as president of the United States because Joseph Biden was sworn in at 11:45 instead of noon. you know. And at some point you got to say, people, you are batshit crazy and you have made a choice to go down a rabbit hole. And I don't have to accommodate that anymore because it's crushing a whole couple of generations of people. So the question now, a long way to get to your original question, is how have those conversations gone? I'm really at a point where some people are just gone and they ain't coming back. And I don't think I'm going to be able to fix that. But what I have found then in having those discussions, and I think it's going to be somewhat of a seed change and maybe even a rebranding change for me, is what's rising up is a whole bunch of people who say, hey, I have a faith. I love God. I love Jesus. I love whatever. My faith looks like this, but I don't want it to look like that. And so I think, and I call it post-evangelical. There's this post-evangelical world out there where people are really hungry for faith and community, but they just don't want it to look like this exclusive, nationalistic, white Jesus religion anymore. And so I think it's, again, the good opportunity of the season is we get to say, what does legitimate, authentic faith look like? And how do I come to you and say, faith looks like this to me? What does it look like to you, without us both picking up guns and then deciding to shoot each other because we disagree on it? And I think God really likes that. I don't know. I don't think we can fix that old time religion. And Jesus didn't try to fix it when he was on earth. He just said, hey, see that temple? It's going to be totally destroyed and a new thing is coming. And so maybe we're just in another time in history where that religion has worn out its welcome in our society and it's going to wind down, and some ugliness is going to be in that transition, but something really new and beautiful is coming and arising. And what I hear from people like you.
And these conspiracy theories, it makes sense why people believe them, and especially smart people too, because it makes sense of the world. We're all trying to make sense of the world. And these things have the benefit of making sense of every single part of it. And and especially people that are hurting. I recall this story. I went to seminary. God knows why I did. And my seminary roommate was a chaplain on Skid Row, and he would lead a Bible study with like 100 homeless addicts of various kinds. And we would sit around, as we do in seminary, drinking whiskey and planning Bible studies. And he would craft these amazing kind of progressive Bible studies where it's all about showing how the Bible liberates the poor and Jesus is on the side of the oppressed. And he'd be so like impassioned with this, like, I'm going to deliver this and liberate their minds to show them that God loves them for exactly who they are. And he would deliver it to them, and the first thing they would say is, we were hoping you'd talk about Revelation and the end times. We really want to learn more about 666. And I don't think we're ever going to get rid of that in people, that they want like vengeance, and they want in and out. They want all. And so I think you're right. I think this old-timey hits on something about us as humans that we like it. We like it. And yeah, I'm definitely not of the camp to get rid of it. I think we just, for a lot of us, especially those of us who have a history of either trauma or damage from it, for us, it's about letting it go. You know, you go to therapy and for the first time and you learned about how bad your parents were or whatever. And you're like, I don't want to be like them because they were so awful to me or whatever it is. And the first thing you do is you get mad at them, you hate them, you blame them, you call them and said, this guy with a PhD in psychology told me you're a dick, Dad. You do that. And then at a certain point, as maturity happens, you start to realize that they're just people trying to make sense of it and trying to do the right thing. And even though you're not going to do what they did, you have compassion and you're no longer angry with them. You have sympathy and you just want a relationship with them. And so that's where I'm at with religion these days, because I have wonderful people in my lives that I don't know why I'm just on the well thing, but it's what it is. I have wonderful people in my lives that go to places like the Well, and I think they are genuine people, even though they believe crazy shit. And I care about them, and I don't want, because at the core of me, I'm a materialist. Like, I just want to be with people, and whatever they think in their heads, I don't really care that much. I think it's wrong, but I don't want to destroy a relationship just because you believe some crazy shit, because we all believe some crazy shit at the core.
Yeah, and I think probably where I am, and I've lost a lot of relationship in this, because there is no room for dissension. There is no room for discussion. Either you're in or you're out. And when you start questioning some of the very basic tenets of evangelicalism, and they would certainly think that they are on a more progressive bent than their Catholic friends or somebody else. But when you start to say, ask Rob Bell, if you say, is God really going to send a 16-year-old who says damn before he's hit by an 18-wheeler to eternal flames, to be in anguish for the rest of eternity? And you say that, and the next thing, Franklin Graham's calling you a heretic on the Larry King show. So there is no room. And I've had to make space in my life to say, I'm not going to fix that. But I'm not going to douse the message for those that have been traumatized from it and say, okay, let's try to figure out what faith looks like on the other side of that. So I can, and I do coaching, and I say to people, you can be totally grace-filled towards your parents and still be honest about the things they did that injured your life and start to work those processes through. And so I can be grace-filled for the Evangelical Church, but it was right at the center of what happened on January 6th. And I have to stand up and say, guys, that is not, can I say fucking okay? Yeah. Really, because it makes me that mad. It's not okay, guys. Yeah. And any pastor that's not standing up after January 6th and saying, guys, we got to get out of this QAnon stuff. It is not from heaven. It is evil and dark and will take you to a dark place, I think is derelict in their duty as a leader of people. And for one to say, we're all going to get it anyway. Yeah. Come on.
Yeah.
I have to protect people from that. I can't help it. I got to stand up.
No, I think you're right. And don't take my not wanting, because I'm more talking about,
I'm me and you're you. I'm not putting that on everybody. I'm just saying.
Right. I'm more referring to the sheep and not the shepherds in this situation. Right. The people leading these flocks of people into these ideas, like they're public enemy number one in my book.
For Franklin Graham, I hope there is eternal hell. I'm sorry. Just a little bit of something in my heart that I need to confess there. I would love to see him in them, but sorry, forgive me, God.
Well, yeah. But then I know that's the problem with universal salvation as a concept, that your asshole neighbor is going to be there. That's the worst part of it. It's we believe in hell because we have neighbors and mother-in-laws, right? No, my mother-in-law is actually the sweetest person in the world. But yeah, I think what at least the agenda here is to attack the messengers of these deleterious ideologies that are hurting people and are causing violence. Like those are the people, and they're broken too, and they've been trained by somebody else, and they need to be saved, but they also need to be saved and stopped. And so it's such a.
Do you believe in hell?
No.
Yeah.
Not in the way that most Christians see. I don't think that most Christians actually believe in hell. I think they're full of shit. And the reason is, if you literally believe, we're back to the literally, that if you don't pray a prayer, you're going to be sitting in some place for eternity. You're going to be like the fire department, just running all the time, trying to save every single person. There are people that do this, but 99% don't.
Yeah.
99% don't. And so I don't buy it. I don't think people actually believe it. I mean,
if you really believed it, and believed it, there are some religions that believe once you say the prayer, you can never go to hell ever again. There are others that think you can lose that salvation. So wouldn't it be gracious and grace-filled, once you get saved, you say the sinner's prayer, okay, let's kill you, because eternity is so dour. Let's just send you to heaven right now.
It would make things easier.
Wouldn't that be grace-filled to do that? Because I don't want you to ever have a chance to lose this thing and end up in eternal damnation.
Yeah. That's some like Kool-Aid in the jungle shit with whatever his name was. That's the logical conclusion of those belief systems, as you wind up trying to catch a spaceship or trying to get somewhere sooner. And yeah, I think that's a tough one.
Ignore a whole bunch of passages of the Bible. I'm really, and I'm on, I'm very comfortable sometimes with saying I don't actually know the answer, because sometimes I think we settle for silly answers. But the Bible talks about fire being a purifying force as much as it talks about being a punishing force. In fact, probably more, it talks about purification by fire. And so the idea of, and this goes back to my asshole neighbor going to be in heaven with me, I think we all face the consequences of our choices and our actions, and that is some form of hell. And the story of the young men going in the fiery furnace, they went in with ropes and they came out without ropes. The fire actually burned their bondages off. And so maybe there is, a karma type experience where you're going to go through hell because of the choices that you make, but that hell fire is going to be something purifying. And maybe that happens while we're on earth. Maybe that happens in eternity. I don't know. But I'm definitely at a place where the idea of, even if there is an eternal pit of hell, I think you really have to want to go there, and you really have to fight to get there. And God is fighting to keep you from getting there. So this idea of you get to eternity and, oh, you should have picked door number 2, but you picked door number 1, bummer, see you later, is ludicrous. Absolutely ridiculous.
It goes back to the pro-life thing ultimately, because if you're a Christian, you believe life extends beyond death. And so if you're pro-life, you have to be pro-life after death too, if you're a Christian. So it's just so complicated. And I really do think most people's beliefs are rationalizations of presuppositions that they already have. And I think hell is such a tricky one because it's such a demarcator of like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing? And that's what it's become. And it's sad that's what it's become, but that's what it's become. And to take that away from people, it just feels like an injustice to them to take it away. What's my reward? But at the same time, you have to break it down. Like at a certain point, we just have to ask, what does it take? And then there's the second part, which is, do we even believe in free will anymore? What does it mean to choose something? So I think a lot of these questions are too big for the everyday Christian to think about. And it's much easier just to think, you either pay for the ticket and get in or you don't. And I'm just trying to think of this like pearly gates situation where you're like, Jesus, I still think you're a dick. So I'm going to go sit in the fire. It's just so absurd. It's almost like some kind of absurd, like Shakespearean comedy that someone would actually make that choice. I don't know.
And I'm more
it's
and
such
more
a big topic.
Seeing that absurdity. And so again, I get a lot of comments on things I talk about abortion on social media, and they'll sound like this. Psalm 139 says, he numbered our days before we were born. So how can you not think that abortion is murder? And and so this is how my mind works. I'm like, if God knows our days before we're born, then doesn't he know that child's going to be aborted? Wouldn't he be aware of that? Or how would he be shocked? Oh, I planned this whole life out and then it got snuffed out. It's nonsensical. It doesn't make sense. And again, so it doesn't come back to, so let's celebrate abortion. It's awesome when people have unwanted pregnancies. We're not there, but let's start thinking that there's a bigger picture to all of this. And if we're putting it in the context of God in the Bible, he has grace for that unborn child and a destiny and a purpose, either here or in the hereafter, and for the mother and father and everybody else involved as well. And if he is this omnipotent, omniscient, all-loving God, then he can cover all of that at the same time. And I don't have to sit and fret and feel like I need to call people baby killers and heretics because they disagree with me on it. It just takes away from the sting of it all, I believe.
Yeah, and
then we can get along.
I wrote this down before we started as like notes to myself, but I think this really captures it, which is what I wrote down when I was thinking about like this concept of pro-life and Christianity. I wrote that the most challenging thing about Christianity is what makes it distinctive, which is its universal nature. Without that universal nature, we're just another local, regional cult like the rest of them. But if you accept this universal promise, then suddenly pro-life means not only saving fetuses, but migrant children and wearing a mask at Trader Joe's. That's really what it means at the core of it. And so either you accept that or you don't, and that's cool. The world has plenty of pagans. Ultimately, I don't want to force any. I just want to challenge people that if you want to adopt this title and use it liberally like people do, you need to accept the challenge and accept how hard it's going to be, which is to be universal in your thinking.
So by universal, you mean it's not exclusive to a group of people. It was for everyone.
Right. Pro-life means everybody. And we could talk about our biggest struggle, most people's biggest struggle, which is animals and the planet. And that's the one that we don't want to talk about because we're all so guilty with it. And then obviously the people that pick the food, and obviously the people that make our shit for 10 cents an hour. So there's a whole, once you open up Pandora's box, then you have some humility in never wanting to take the moral high ground. Yeah. Once you see how complicated moral equations and questions are, you will be the most humble person alive, because you will say, I can't say I'm pro-life because I do this and this. All I can say is I'm trying to be a better person. That's all I can say, really. And so that's my hope, is a few less people would call themselves Christians or pro-life, because it's so hard to be that if you wanted to, and just say, okay, I'm trying to do a little better, or I'm trying to do the right thing each day.
I think what's revolutionary about Christianity, I think one of the things that is amazing about Christianity is it really was radical for its time. The New Testament was radical for its time. It still had some things about slaves, and I'm certainly saying they still were in the context of their culture, but
not a rule book.
What's that?
Not a
rule book, not a rule book, but a narrative of a story about the system of do this and God will be pleased is so disempowering of humanity. Let's destroy the system. And like any Christian today would tell you, the thing about Christianity versus all other religions is we're not a religion, we're a relationship. I'm sure we've all heard that one. Relationship means then we just got to get in the mess together and work it out together. It's not about the rules anymore. If I'm like, okay, honey, we're married, so now let me set 10 rules and let me see how far I can get towards those rules without upsetting you, that's not a very good relationship. Or here's my rules, and if you violate them, I'm going to send you to burning fire of hell forever. Again, not a great relationship, but a relationship that says, I'm going to just take away all the rules, and now we're going to have to figure out how to get along together, and we're going to destroy the systems that have been pushing against that. All of a sudden, that can be very freeing, but we're afraid of that because, man, if there's no rules, how are we going to know what's right and wrong? And so I like your definition of it. I'm just trying to be better to people around me today than I was yesterday. And I'm going to be self-sacrificing to make sure others are doing well. That's how marriage really works. If you're saying, I'm going to make sure my wife's needs are met because that's going to make our life more profitable together, then she's doing the same for you, or your spouse is doing the same for you, then you can have a really great relationship together where needs are being met and you're moving forward together. And it's not perfect, it's messy, but it's wonderful in walking that together.
So my conclusion is always book recommendations. And I've got two. So let me grab one of them because I don't know if I'm saying his name.
Okay.
So the first one is this one, A Beginner's Guide to Japan. And it's Pico, but I don't know, it's Iyer or Iyer. He's got a bunch of TED Talks, so I'm probably saying it wrong.
Yeah.
And it seems like a totally random book to recommend, but I'm recommending it because once you get out of this world of in or out, right or wrong, rule books, you start to become really curious about the world. That's an effect of this. You become less like insular and worried about right or wrong and following rules and reading all the rules and putting the rules in order. And you just start going, I want to learn more about other people. That's an effect of this that I think is the most generative part of letting that part of your life go. And so this is such a cool book because it's basically someone who's not from Japan just sitting in another culture and just making these observations. I think it's a wonderful book, and it's a wonderful, more than that, it's a wonderful kind of mental model for how to look at the world. But the second one I'd recommend for Fresno people which is Anthony Cody's book, Borderland Apocrypha, that just nearly won the National Book Award for Poetry, and he got his degree from Fresno State right down the road. It's a beautiful book of poetry, and honestly, poetry hits on these themes harder than any prose or any podcast could ever do it. And it's a lot of the book is about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, so the treaty after the end of the Mexican-American War. And you see this English and Spanish weaved in, and this kind of inherent contradiction in people's lives and this tension. And it's such a great way to see through someone else's eyes. And so that's what I would recommend ultimately is, and I don't know if who I'm talking to exactly, or whether it's someone who's like struggling with seeing some other way outside of the religious way that they've grown up with, or it's someone that's fresh out of that, or whatever, whoever. I think the consequence of letting go is you're able to finally love people and try and learn about people. And so that's the consequence. And so hopefully that makes you more curious. And
so do you want me to make a book recommendation?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we always end with books.
Oh, I should have been ready. Sorry.
Come on, Paul. What you got? Just tell me what you're reading.
This is called, I don't know if that's backwards on the screen.
No, it's right. Jesus
and the Disinherited. It's a very old book by Howard Thurman.
Okay.
And it's a book about how Jesus, what he spoke to the oppressed and how he came to free the oppressed. And so it's written by a Black man about the oppression of Black people in America, and how Jesus, as a member of an oppressed society that then oppressed other societies like the Samaritans and such, and the prostitutes, women, how he sees that Jesus spoke into that and said, this is not okay. If we're allowing our oppression to cause us to be oppressors, that needs to be changed. And then ultimately tied it back to, so white people, you're under this oppression of religion that's causing you to turn and oppress others. So it's a very fascinating, very good, little bit of a difficult read because it's very dense. So you can't really, even though it's thin, you're not going to be able to get it done in an hour, but a very good book. And the other one,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I was gonna bring something. I'm actually on those issues. I was actually watching Denzel Washington's Malcolm X, that movie, for the first time. It blows me away how great that. I don't know how I've not seen that until now. I've just recently been trolling through HBO Max because they have so many like old movies that I've lied to people and told them I've watched, but I haven't actually watched. And so this is one of them where I'm finally watching it for the first time. Like, oh shit, this is amazing. So anyway, continue.
And another really good book, and I can't show it to you because I think I read it on Kindle, but is a book called Irresistible by Andy Stanley. I don't know if you know who Andy Stanley is, but this is like the audience you're talking about, people that are in the church, but maybe want to hear. So his dad's a very famous Baptist pastor, and he now pastors his own mega church in Atlanta and writes a book that says, hey, we got to stop the stupid arguments of the Bible. Let's stop trying to defend Noah and the young earth and that there was really a Tower of Babel. Like, why are we fighting these stupid battles? And then when our kids go to college, they learn that what we're saying is BS and easily disprovable. And then they throw out the whole thing. Let's quit trying to defend the stupid stuff of the Bible. And let's just focus on the life of Jesus and what that can mean to people. And he does it from a very traditional evangelical perspective, but that's why I think it can be a really effective book, because it does give people that are in that world the chance to say, whoa, this is an evangelical megachurch pastor saying, who cares if there really was a flood and Noah? Why are we battling over that when the story that we actually have to tell can be life-changing for people? And let's really focus on that. So it's fantastic, well done book that made me think, oh, he's done. He's never pastoring another day again as long as he lives. But somehow he's survived it so far.
And his dad is Charles, right?
Charles Stanley. You're right, Charles.
Right. See, I know my evangelical lore.
You're televangelist. In your
yes, I do.
Let me tell you another movie. Have you seen the Chicago 7?
I have not watched that. It's been on my kind of to-do list. It's very good.
Absolutely fantastic. Blew me. Another courtroom drama, you think, when you see it, but Boy, so well done. And a story that I didn't know a ton about, but it's about the Chicago riots around the 1968 Democratic Convention and the trials thereafter of Abby Hoffman and Tom Hayden and those guys. And really well done, all-star cast of actors and actresses. And so highly recommend it.
It's a great time for television. And I think tomorrow we get that new, speaking of Denzel, we get that new movie that he did with Jared Leto and whatever the other guy is about and this is Central Valley related. It's about the killer in, I think, Kern County. I forget his name. But there's a lot of good TV and movies to watch. That's the whole point here. But you should read books first.
Well, I don't know if we solved the world's problems. What's that?
I was just saying, read books first, then watch TV. That'd be a good order of operations. I think we did solve the world's problems. God loves everybody equally, and we need to act that way. Problem solved.
And pick up a book every once in a while and read about something that doesn't necessarily agree with your own viewpoint. How about that?
It's a good word.
That's a good word.
Yeah.
All right, Jordan, man, thanks for ringing me up and saying, let's have a chat. It's always fun.
It's been good.